Star Walker Studios presents Dungeon Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional D&D podcast. Hello, fellow gamer. Welcome to episode 275 of Dungeon Master's Journey. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. On this show, we discuss the craft and the art of dungeon mastering. I've been running RPGs for over 28 years now, and I produce this show in the hopes that you can benefit from my experience, my triumphs, and my mistakes. So welcome back, everyone. Great to be back. I hope that everyone is doing well out there. I hope everyone is safe and healthy and practicing your social distancing and washing your hands. So, crazy times we're living in, but glad that you could take some time out of your day and join me to talk about dungeon mastering and running D&D and all that fun stuff. So first of all, I want to thank everyone who gave me feedback on last episode 274. I've received quite a few messages from listener DMs out there, and it's really great to hear from you guys. And my call for feedback was answered. So thank you very much. And keep it up. And speaking of which, I was able to set up a new email address for the show. So my new email is dungeonmastersjourney@gmail.com. Pretty simple. There's no apostrophe in there, just normal letters, no spaces or anything like that. Just dungeonmastersjourney@gmail.com. So that's the best way to get a hold of me. Shoot me an email, ask me a question, give me ideas for topics for the show, give me feedback on today's episode or any other episode you've been listening to. I'd love to hear from you, and your feedback really helps improve the show for everyone. So thank you, everyone who's reached out. Really appreciate it. So speaking of feedback and speaking of last week's episode, first of all, I want to mention that I heard back from Knox, who asked one of the questions we discussed last week. And one of the things we were talking about last week was the situation with the Loxodon, which also thank you to everyone who let me know where that comes from. I heard from actually quite a few of you who let me know that the Loxodon is actually from the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, and it's kind of like a elephant person. So I actually have that book and have flipped through that book, but I guess the Loxodon didn't stick out in my mind, but it seems like it's at least popular with some of you, which honestly surprises me. But hey, as someone who wrote in pointed out, one of the great things about this hobby and about this game in particular is that there are so many different options, different types of characters you can play, different types of monsters and things like that. And so, I mean, that's really great because as this person pointed out, they were mentioning my dislike of the Yuan tea that I've mentioned before, and how, they really like the Yuan tea, which is awesome. We all have our preferences, and the cool thing is there's so much out there for D&D that whatever you're into, there's stuff for that. And also kind of the flip side of that is there is so much that you don't have to feel bad about not using some of it. So if you don't like Loxodons or Yuan tea or lycanthropes or whatever, you don't have to use them because there's so much stuff out there. There's plenty of stuff to fill that void. For instance, in my D&D world, Primordia, that I've been working on, I made a decision that I didn't want gnomes in my world for various reasons, even though they're one of the options in the player's handbook. So I took gnomes out, but I was able to add more playable races than I took out because there's just so much stuff out there. And just as an aside, I am considering changing that and having gnomes in my world. I'm actually considering another revision to my setting, and if I decide to go forward with that, I'll probably talk about it on the show. And right now, I'm just kind of thinking about what exactly I want to change, because I know there's definitely some things I want to change. And if I'm going to change things, it makes more sense to change everything all at once than to change something here, change something there. And since I've already been running games in my setting, what I would like to do is have these changes happen in world. And my campaign I'm running right now, which is the one I used to put on the podcast here, Hinterlands of Valandria / Blood of the Avatars. That campaign's kind of, I'd say it's in the last half of the campaign now. So I think that hopefully by the time I end this campaign, I'll know what I want to change. And I think what I may do is actually advance my timeline by quite a bit, like maybe a few decades or even a century or more after this campaign is over. And then I can work in those changes and say that the world itself has changed, as opposed to just making changes in like retconning things or whatever. I really like the idea of having the changes be changes that occur in the world, and having that be kind of a big deal, a big event. And if you've listened to any of my actual play, the player characters, it turns out, spoiler alert, they find out eventually that they are actually avatars of the gods. And so I think it would be kind of cool after this campaign is over for the next campaign to take place maybe a few decades later, or even a century or more later after that. And these characters that these guys are playing right now have become legends, and maybe living legends. They might still be around depending on what they each decide to do, and depending on how far I advance the timeline. But that's something I've talked about in the show before on world building episodes, is playing around with running games in different periods of time within your setting, and how you can have a lot of fun with that. And it's a way that you could have a very different game than what you normally have without having to use a different setting. You could use your setting and say, oh, this campaign's going to take place back in the distant past, or maybe in the distant future. And so because of that, I can make things very different, even though it's still the same world, and I don't have to reinvent the wheel again. I don't have to do everything over again, because I still have the world. And at the same time, you're kind of fleshing out another period of history of your world. So it's kind of a win-win way to go about it. So so hopefully there'll be some more world building episodes in the future. I know a lot of you really enjoyed those, and I haven't done them for a while, just because I've been running games in my setting and kind of cooled off on the world building a little bit. But I've been getting the itch again, and I have these ideas that have been kind of piling up of things I want to add or changes I want to make. So I feel like the time is coming to actually do that. So I'll share that with you guys. So anyway, wow, that was a huge tangent. So Knox had written back, and we were talking about perception, and specifically the Loxodon, where they have an ability that gives them advantage on perception rolls involving smell. And Knox was wondering how I would handle that when there were situations where maybe they have disadvantage on rolls involving sight or something like that. So how would you handle that when you have a character who has one ability that says you get advantage with smell, and another ability that says you get disadvantage with sight? How would you handle that? And so I talked about that last week. So if you're curious about that, you can go check out episode 274. But I was having a hard time thinking of an example of when this would come into play. So Knox gave me a couple examples here. He said one example could be if you're tracking a fire genasi at night, you might not see any tracks, but do you maybe smell smoldering leaves or something like that from the genasi? So yeah, that could be a situation where, maybe you've got disadvantage on the perception with sight to try to track them the normal way because maybe it's dark or whatever. But you've got this special scent ability that gives you advantage. So yeah, and I think in that specific situation, I would say that the advantage with the smell cancels out the disadvantage with the sight, and I would make it a straight roll. But you could rule it differently, of course, depending on how you think that should work, and also more details of the situation. Or another example he gives is he says maybe it's total darkness during a fight. Could you use your smell sense to treat it like dim light for targeting purposes? For example, fairly well where the enemy is because of the direction that the odor is coming from. So yeah, that's another example where, if your smell was sensitive enough, or if the person you're fighting has a strong enough odor and you are fighting in darkness, you can't see them at all. Maybe that could help you, and maybe, that could cancel out some of the penalties of not being able to see, or maybe if your DM's feeling really generous, maybe you even get the advantage from the smell. So yeah, thanks Knox for those examples. It definitely helps to have examples for these kinds of things. And Knox also says, as a brand new player and now DM to D&D, your podcast is amazing. It's my one-stop shop to learn about the game. Well, thank you, Knox. That's awesome. I'm glad you're finding the show useful. Oh, and real quickly before we move on, I just want to let you know I have started a new podcast called Lex Out Loud. You can find that at starwalkerstudios.com too. And it is a discussion podcast of science fiction and fantasy in our media, which is to say in movies, in television shows, and in books, and kind of just a chance for me to talk about stuff I'm really enjoying right now as far as genre entertainment, what I'm really digging, and talk about it. I did the first episode a week or so ago, and in that episode, I just kind of went through all of the just awesome TV shows I've been watching lately, and a little bit about what I like about each of them, and getting ready to make the second episode. And I think the second episode, I might talk some about Star Trek Picard, because that show just wrapped up its first season and was freaking amazing. So yeah, check out that podcast if you are into that kind of thing. Would love to have you along for that. All right. So this week, as I think I mentioned last week, I want to talk to you about a system called the Heroic Chronicle by Matt Mercer. And this is from the new D&D book, Explorer's Guide to Wildemount, or Wildemount, however you want to say that. And this is a setting book for Matt Mercer's D&D world, Exandria, specifically the continent of Wildemount. So this is a super cool book, and I will probably do a full review of it in a future episode. So if that's something you'd like to hear, let me know. But in a nutshell, it's a really well-made book. It's a really cool setting. If you watch Critical Role, you probably know more about the setting than I do. I haven't read all the book yet, and I haven't really watched the second campaign of Critical Role at all. So if you watch that, then you already know probably if you would like this or not. And if you don't, it's a good setting. And honestly, I think it does a better job of being a kind of quote generic, and I don't mean that in a bad way, a generic D&D setting than the Forgotten Realms does, or definitely better than Eberron or Ravenloft, which are the other kind of settings we've been given for 5th edition. So if you're looking for a more vanilla, maybe that's a better word than generic, a more vanilla kind of D&D world, with more the tropes you're expecting, than say, Ravenloft, which is much more horror, or Eberron, which is this weird kind of magus steampunk thing, or Forgotten Realms, which is just this weird kitchen sink of insanity. Neither one of those, at least in my opinion, are great examples of a vanilla D&D world. And it's actually strange to me that we don't have that for 5th edition. So if you're like me and that's kind of what you've been looking for and you haven't found it, this might just be the setting for you. So like I said, if people are interested, I can do a more extensive review of it. But what I want to talk about today is just one specific thing in here. And it's actually when I heard about this book and I read a little bit about what was going to be in it, I was really excited about this Heroic Chronicle and really wanted or was looking forward to learning about it. I was excited to read this book anyway, just because Matt Mercer is an amazing DM and he's super creative and he's an amazing world builder. And I knew that any setting book coming from him would be really good, and it is. So today we're going to talk about this Heroic Chronicle, and what this is in a nutshell really is it's some ways to flesh out a player character during character creation and to flesh out their backstory, basically what their career and what their life was like before the game starts, before they became an adventurer. So this system complements and adds to the background system that we're given in the player's handbook and makes use of the backgrounds and then some additional tables and whatnot here to help you flesh out your character's backstory, what they were doing before they were an adventurer. So what I really like about this is I really like how it pulls in things from your setting. So, this isn't going to be super helpful to you as far as something you can just use out of the box if you're not running a campaign or an adventure in the setting of Wildemount. So if you're not using that, this is going to be more of an inspiration, more of a kind of roadmap to how you could do this kind of thing with the setting that you are using, which is what's exciting to me because I run D&D in my own homebrewed setting. And, one of the challenges when you're using your own homebrewed setting, especially when you're running for players who haven't played in your setting before or haven't played in it a lot, is they don't know anything about it. If you're running in, say, the Forgotten Realms, you may have players who already know all kinds of stuff about the realms. They may know more about the realms than you do because that information is out there. But if you're running in your own world that you made up, then they're probably not going to know anything about your world other than what they've learned at the table in previous game sessions. Unless you gave them a big, thick stack of stuff to read. And even then they may not know a lot of that because they probably didn't read it all. So it can be challenging to find ways to kind of pull the characters into the setting more, have them more grounded in the setting and have the players be able to use that when they're role-playing their characters and when they're coming up with their backstory and deciding what they want to do, to be able to use as many things from the setting as possible. So I think that these kind of charts and whatnot here are a great way that you can help do that for your players when they're making new characters. So, if you're running or you're going to run in this world, Wildemount, then this will be great. You can just use this as is. Otherwise, you can use it as inspiration or as an example of how you might create something like this for yourself. So that'll be kind of the perspective I take talking about this, because that's the perspective I'm in. I'm not planning to run in this setting. I plan to steal things I like from it for my setting of Primordia, but I'm not planning to use this. So I'm going to be using these tables more as inspiration to make something similar for my world in my game. So that's how I'm going to kind of approach this. And I may here and there mention some things that I might do differently, because although this is great and I like what they're doing here, I think there are definitely improvements that could be made, at least to make it better fit what I want for my game. And you may want to make different changes yourself depending on what you're using it for. So I'll just kind of talk a little bit about what's in here and how I see this being useful to you in your game. All right, so basically what we're doing here is we're just fleshing out some more information about the player character, and the starting point for this is their background. So let's just take as kind of our example or our thought exercise here of we're making a player character. We've decided what race and class we're going to play. We've decided what background we want, and then that's when we come here to the Heroic Chronicle. So our first thing here is Homeland. Okay, so this is just simply, where is your character from? So in this book, in this setting on this continent of this world, there are kind of 5 regions. So they have here a table you can roll on to randomly determine which of those 5 regions you're from. And then we have later, we're going to figure out what specific settlement your character is from. So first there's a table called Homelands, where you figure out the region, the general area that you're from, or the country, if you will. And then later we have a table, actually various tables for settlements, where you determine a specific village or town or city that your character is from. So that's all this is. Personally, I totally get why they did it this way with these tables, but hopefully you don't have many players rolling on these tables. Hopefully you can give them enough information, good enough descriptions of these places that they can just pick something that seems cool or fun to them. But, you may have a player, for whatever reason, they decide to roll randomly to determine this stuff. So for those people, these are all presented as tables that you can roll on. So just to kind of give you kind of how this is. So like for the regions, there are 5 regions, and you roll percentile, and, it's basically, I was going to say, no, they're not the same percentages for each, but there's the Menagerie Coast is one. There's the Mercer Valley is the second. The Zemni Fields is the third. Graying Wildlands is the fourth. And then Zorhas, I'm assuming, is the fifth. So these are all like fairly large geographical areas. So first you figure out which of those areas you're from. And then for each of those regions, they have a table of settlements. So we'll just take the first one here, the Menagerie Coast. We have a table of settlements in the Menagerie Coast, and it tells you if each one is a town, a city, a village, or whatever. And again, that's another table you could roll on. So if you wanted to, you could randomly determine what region you're from, and then randomly determine which settlement within that region you're specifically from. So, this would be pretty simple to set up for your world, whatever that is. So, if you're using the Forgotten Realms and your campaign set in the Sword Coast, then you could decide how many, regions in the Sword Coast you want to have available for player characters to be from. And you could set up a table for that. And then, the towns within those regions and all that. It'd be pretty straightforward, pretty easy to do. So really just the gist here is you're getting your players to drill down into what country is your character from and what city or town or village within that country is your character from? And then we're going to go from there. So personally, my advice to you, if you're using, for instance, your own homebrewed setting, is, like I mentioned just a minute ago, have a really good description of each of these places for your player characters, and keep them concise. They shouldn't have to read, pages upon pages of text. You just want to give them a paragraph about each of your regions, so that they know what this country is like. So maybe one country is a democracy and the other country is an empire, and the other country is, a collection of tribes or something like that. So you can give basic information on, kind of what's what kind of government does this place has? How is it structured? Kind of what's it like? If it's analogous to a real world place, then, and that's a kind of a quick shorthand, you can say, oh, this is like the Roman Empire and, back in the day, or whatever it is. So have a really good evocative description of each of these regions, so your players know what they're about, and also if it's going to have any impact on the campaign, or if certain regions are known for certain things, you can tell them that too. And then for each of the settlements within the region, you can give them information on that. Now, personally, I mean, it's awesome what they did here, but I would approach this a little differently myself. First of all, this is a $50, like 300 plus, about 300 page book, right? So there's a lot in here. So this is way more than you would need to do for your game. For instance, opening up the entire continent is, maybe for your game that would be great, but for most people that's way more than you need, and will just kind of create its own problems if you have characters coming from all over this huge continent and these very diverse places somehow coming together to form a group and adventure together. That's a lot of logistics to work out how that happened. Personally, I would trim this down a lot for my game. I might give them one or two regions to pick from, and then within each of those regions, maybe a handful of settlements. Just the Menagerie Coast, they've got 10 different settlements to choose from, which I feel like is way more than you need, especially if you're going to have more than one region. And it just becomes information overload, especially if your players don't already know this world. It's a lot of homework they got to do just to figure out where they're from. So it'd be a lot better just to have one or two regions for them to pick from, and then within each of those regions have maybe 3 to 5 settlements for them to pick from. Or, if you're going to use something like the city of Waterdeep, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, you guys are all from Waterdeep. That I did something similar with my current campaign. We started off in the city of Elandria, and I said, you guys are all either from Elandria or you've been living here long enough that this is your home now, just because I didn't want to deal with, the logistics of, oh, this character's from halfway across the world, and how did they get here, and how do they know these people, and blah, 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 blah. And my city of Elandria is diverse enough that they could still play any race that they wanted to play, or any kind of character that they wanted to play. So I wasn't limiting their creation options at all. I was just making it more manageable for me and for the players at the beginning, kind of coming up with this stuff. But again, you can go as deep into this as you want. If you want to give your players 10 regions to choose from and give them 20 cities in each region to choose from, go for it. But you might get some analysis paralysis if you go that far with it. All right, so let's see. This is a little, I feel like this could be organized a little bit better, especially to try and talk about it on a podcast, trying to figure out kind of what order to go through this. But so we come up with our homeland, which is the region we're from, and then the settlement from within that. And then once you know that, you have this social status relationships table, which honestly, I think that there's something that got cut out here, or something they were going to do and never did, because they call this a social status relationships table, and they mentioned social status in the text a few times, but there's actually nothing about social status here. It's really the background relationships table. What this table is doing is it's taking all the backgrounds that are available in this world for characters, and for each of those backgrounds, it's telling you what you get from that background based on the region that you're from. So there's 4 basic regions here. I'm not sure what happened to the 5th one, but there's 4 regions here, and you have the possibility, depending on your background, of getting either an ally or a rival, or possibly one of each, or neither. So again, it doesn't actually have anything to do with social status, but what this is doing is saying, based on the background that you have and based on where you live, you may get an ally and or a rival from your background. And this comes from one of the books, and I'm not going to go look it up, but I'm thinking it's Xanathar's Guide. I'm pretty sure it's Xanathar's Guide, where they introduced this idea of allies and rivals. They introduced it more as something that you can use during downtime. But again, this is something you can establish in character creation using this. Is you can say, if you're an acolyte from the graying wildlands, then you start out with one rival before we even do anything. So that's pretty cool. I love that. And my only caution here, or my only thought here is, each of your player characters is going to do this. And looking at this, it looks like, it's possible for a character not to have any allies or rivals, I think. But it seems likely that most characters will end up with 2 allies and or rivals. Possibly less, possibly more, but I'd say 2 would be a good average. So, if you have 4 player characters, that's 8 allies or rivals, 8 NPCs that you've got to come up with now, or have the players help you come up with, and not just come up with, but actually use them in a meaningful way during the campaign. So depending on how large your group is, how many players you have, and depending on how long your campaign runs, that may not be a big deal, or that may be impossible to do. So that's something to think about. And I think they even talk about this in here, is think about the length of your campaign, and, how much is really realistic for you to be able to do. And you might want to kind of adjust things, to fit. So if you're running a shorter campaign, or if you have a large group of players, you may not have time to really give good treatment to, 2 allies or rivals per player character. So you might want to trim it down to 1. So one thing that I want to do, because I got all excited about this because it talked about social status, and then it didn't do anything with social status, because that's something that I feel is kind of missing in the game. And I've talked about this on the show before when I talked about cost of living or lifestyle expenses in the player's handbook, is this idea of, you have within feudal societies, you usually had 3 classes. You had your peasant class, your merchant class, and then your nobility. And for most people, you were born, lived, and died in one of those classes, and mobility, especially upward mobility, wasn't very likely. Now, in a D&D game, your characters are adventurers. So just because you start out as a peasant doesn't mean you're always going to be a peasant, because you'll probably end up rich if you live long enough. So it's something that I think should be a more important part of the game, because in these settings, your social class would be extremely important. It would affect everything from where you live to who you associate with, to what kind of access you have to various NPCs in the city or whatever. So it should be a really important thing, and it should be a bigger deal than they make it out to be, which is to say really no deal at all. So I was inspired by this, and what I really thought they were going to do was tell us based on the backgrounds what social class your character is, and they didn't do that. So I went ahead and did that for my world, and had some fun with it, and it was actually pretty simple to do. Just taking all of the backgrounds and deciding for each background, with this person, which class would they be? Would they be peasant, merchant, or noble? And then I even tied it into cost of living and all that stuff. So yeah, if you're curious about that, that's something I could talk about on a future episode. But I had some fun with that. So already I've kind of modified this for my own use. All right. So we've got our region, we've got our settlement, and that has told us we might have some rivals or allies that we get to start with. Next is our family. So again, there's tables if you want to figure this out randomly, or you can just decide. We start out with number of parents and number of siblings. So you figure that out. And this actually... Yeah, so this is somewhat correlated to the size of the settlement. And it's really just giving you a number. So how many parents do you have? How many siblings do you have? And then next up is a chart called family relationships, or powerful family relationships. So it mentions here your first allies and rivals are your family. Sometimes your family members are your closest friends. Sometimes you hate their guts. So you roll a D3 and you basically get allies or rivals from within your family, 1 to 3 of them. So again, that's why I'm saying, the average is probably going to be around 2 plus or minus, because you're getting 1 to 3 just from your family. So even if you don't get any from your background, because there are a few backgrounds that don't give you any allies or rivals, you're going to get at least 1 from your family relationships. And then there's a chart you can roll on for your family relationships that kind of give you broad strokes, kind of what your relationship is with this person. So I'll just grab a couple of examples. So here's one that could be a rival. You thought you killed this family member, whether by accident or otherwise. You never expected to see them again, but now they're out for your blood. So that would be a rival. Or an ally. The family member left long ago for reasons you don't understand or won't talk about. Before they left, they promised you that they would return in your hour of greatest need. You gain 1 ally. So it's pretty cool. And they do a pretty good job with these examples of making them somewhat evocative and open-ended. So hopefully just reading it, you kind of maybe get some ideas of what you could do with this and where you could go with it. So then we have ally and rival relationships tables. So these are for the allies and rivals that you got with your background. And it's a similar thing. You can roll on this or pick one that sounds good. So an example of an ally is this person once lost a bet to you and is still trying to scrounge up the cash to pay you back. They've decided you'd both be better off if they put you in their debt instead. So, this is an ally that you're going to be able to get probably fairly frequent favors from. Example of a rival, you once loved this person but broke their heart. They are now obsessed with making you feel the same pain they felt. Now, I guess another thing I should point out here is if you use this, especially if you're using this straight from the book, be aware there aren't a ton of these. So ally relationships, there's like 10. There's like 10 ally relationships and 10 rival relationships. So if you've got 4 or 5 players, and especially if they're doing this separately or they're rolling randomly for these, you could easily end up with players who have the exact same ally or rival relationship. So one thing I would definitely suggest to you is adding more. I would use this as a starting point to get your creative juices going, but I would add a lot more to these. So where the settlements, I thought they're giving you too many. Here, I don't think they're giving you enough. And I'd try to double them. So instead of having 10 different ally relationships, I'd come up with 10 more. So there's 20. And that'll just reduce the odds that you get 2 people with the same thing, and also will give the players more ideas more things to choose from. Because with any of these, these relationships, you can always come up with your own on the spot, or the player can, or you can together. So this is definitely one of those things where I would take this as a starting point, a launching point, something to give you some ideas, but don't feel like you're beholden to these. If you come up with something on your own, or you and the player do, it's probably going to fit the campaign better than one of these anyway. Next, we have ally and rival identities. And again, this is a table you can roll on if you want. And this is just telling you a stat block you can use for this person. So a lot of these come from, or actually most of them come from the monster manual. And then the few that don't actually come from this book. So they're not, unfortunately or fortunately, depending how you look at it, they're not using NPCs from other sources. So I believe it's Xanathar's Guide. There's a lot of NPCs in there, like there's specialty wizards in there, like an illusionist or whatever. So this is only using the monster manual, which that's a good thing. If you don't have Xanathar's Guide, that this is still useful to you. But if you do have Xanathar's Guide or another book that has more of these kind of generic NPCs, again, I would make my own version of the table and throw those in too. So, we've got like commoner, acolyte, bandit captain, berserker, cultist, those kinds of things. There are some cool ones. If you roll a 99, you get an archmage. And if you roll a 100, you get either an adult gold dragon or an adult red dragon, DM's choice. So that's awesome. So there are, you could get something like really cool. You're probably just going to end up with some mundane NPC, but you could get something really cool like a dragon, which is cool. Also with some of these, with the more awesome ones, you get what's called a fateful moment. So a fateful moment is a turning point in your character's life. It's something that happened in your past that either had an impact on you or will have an impact on you in the future. And there's a table of 20 of these to choose from. I'll just grab a couple examples of these fateful moments. So one is your parents were murdered in front of you. Roll on the ally and rival identities table to determine the type of creature that killed them. You have proficiency in the stealth and survival skills. Yeah, so some of these are going to give you some skill proficiencies. Some will give you a feat. Some might give you a magic item. They vary. Here's one. You saved a pseudo-dragon from being eaten by a giant spider in a dark forest. The pseudo-dragon now loyally follows you wherever you go, even if you'd rather it stay hidden. It's controlled by the DM, but obeys your commands if treated well. So with that one, you get a pseudo-dragon friend. So yeah, those are really cool. And again, you can just use this as a springboard to come up with your own stuff. But I love the idea that a player character can maybe get a feat or a magic item or a companion or a piece of equipment or a skill or two from this. It's really cool. All right. Now the next thing, this is kind of niche. You'll probably either love this or be like, whatever. And this is your favorite food. So I'm assuming from this that Matt Mercer must be a huge fan of food and a foodist. And he has charts of dishes from various places in his world. And you can roll on these charts to see what your favorite food is based on where you come from. That's pretty cool. If you get to that level of granularity in your setting, go for it, and you could even get into, a character whose favorite food isn't a food from their homeland. Maybe your favorite food is a food you encountered later in life when you were traveling as an adventurer. Like, for instance, me, I'm an American. I've grown up in the United States, but I dig Thai food. I wouldn't say it's my favorite food, but it could be, and that would be an example of a food that's my favorite food. That's not from my native culture that I grew up in. So you could even go that far with it. I feel like this idea could be used with so many things, right? Different DMs are going to kind of go down the rabbit hole on different topics when it comes to homebrewing their world. So, Matt Mercer's world, he's got all these culinary dishes he's come up with. Another DM might not go into that, but might know a bunch of different beers that different groups of dwarves and elves and humans and halflings brew in their world, and might have names for them. So, if you're that DM running in that world, make charts for, what a character's favorite beer is. Or maybe, you're all about the mixers and cocktails in your world, or clothing, right? Clothing fashions. So, if you're a DM who uses your own homebrew world and there's some aspect of your world that you've really gone nuts with, like expanding and developing, whether that's the food or the alcohol or the clothing and the fashions or whatever, this is a great way to pull that in and say, hey, how does your character dress? What's your favorite style? If you're all about the clothes or whatever. And that's pretty cool because as DMs, we tend to be eclectic people. And I've noticed most DMs that use their own world, there'll be something in their world that is really, really developed in a level of detail that isn't done in most other worlds. Like, for instance, Matt Mercer here with the food. So that's really cool. And if that's you and you've done something like that, like pull that in for sure. Your players will probably love it. All right. And then finally, we have a prophecy. This is the one I'm a little lukewarm on. I think this could be great for certain campaigns or certain groups. But the idea here is that you write down 3 aspirations or goals that you have for your character that you want to achieve over the course of the campaign. A prophecy goal should have 2 parts. First is the goal that your character wants to attain. Second is a sense of what complication might come once the goal is met, for good or ill. One of your prophecy goals should be an immediate goal, one should be long-term, and one should be a goal that concludes your character arc at the end of the campaign. You don't have to decide on all 3 goals at the start. You could just choose your immediate goal now and think about the other 2 while you get a feel for the tone of the campaign, which is what I would recommend. Just pick that immediate goal and worry about the others later after you get a better feel for your character and a better feel, as they say, for the campaign and what's going on. And then you'll probably get some better ideas of what to do with those other 2 goals. So each time you complete a prophecy goal, your character gains a mechanical benefit as a reward. What is the benefit? I feel like it tells you, but now I'm not seeing it. Here we go. That comes later. Okay, we'll get to that. So I feel like the best way to explain this is just with a couple examples. Let's see. I will uncover a relic from Iselcross, which is a place, and become famous, but the relic will exact a terrible cost. So that's an example of, they have this prophecy or this goal, they're going to get this relic, and then this idea of a complication, which is that there's going to be some cost associated with this. Now, like I said, I'm pretty lukewarm on this. Honestly, I don't think I would use this. I think this would be awesome for like a single player campaign. This would be just the thing. My concern with this is, let's say I have 4 players. They're each going to come up with 3 of these goals. That's 12 goals that during the campaign I have to work in somehow. And 4 of which I have to work in soon. And not only this goal that they're going to achieve, but also this twist afterward that I'm only given kind of a vague idea of what that's going to be. It just seems like a lot of work for the DM. So yeah, I feel like you're either going to hear this and be like, that's awesome, I'm all about that. Or you're going to hear this and be like, no way. And I'm kind of like on the no way side. Like I said, if I just had 1 player, sure, that'd be awesome. But for any more than 1 or 2 players, I think it would become just another thing that I have to worry about. Just another failure point or possible failure point, trying to work all these in for everybody. Yeah, it's a cool idea, but I think in practice it would be a huge headache for the DM. But if you're going to go for it, good on you. Good luck. So it does give, some thoughts about, think about how long you want your campaign to run. And it says each of the players will have 3 goals set down for their character, each of which needs to be achieved by the end of the campaign. So it's like you have an assignment, DM. You got to do this. If you take the number of game sessions you anticipate your campaign lasting and divide it by the number of prophecy goals laid down by all your players, you'll have the average number of sessions it should take for one player to achieve one goal. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Do with that what you will. So then the reward. So every time a player character completes one of these goals, they gain a reward determined by the DM. And here are some examples of what those rewards could be. For the next 1d10 days, the character gains inspiration whenever they finish a long rest. Or for the next 1d10 days, the character has advantage on saving throws to avoid being frightened. Or for the next 1d4 days, the character's weapon attacks deal an extra 1d6 damage of the weapon's type. I find these underwhelming personally and not terribly creative. I definitely know for me, if I were going to go through the hassle of having all these prophecies for all these characters and making sure they all happen, I would come up with way cooler rewards, because I feel like these rewards, A, they're not worth it for the players to deal with, and B, they're not worth it for the DM to deal with. And also, even if I use these rewards, I'd get rid of the die rolls, like 1d10 days or 1d4 days, because what if you roll 1? So I achieve this prophecy, this big part of my character arc, and I get inspiration for 1 day, or I do extra damage for 1 day. If I rolled a 10, that'd be awesome. But if I roll 1, that's kind of lame. So I think I just, as a DM, decide how long do I want this to last. And I just say, you get this thing for 3 days or whatever it is. I'd get rid of the die roll. And yeah, I think I could do better than just getting inspiration every day, or having advantage on saves versus fear, or doing an extra 1d6 weapon damage. I mean, I don't know. I think we could come up with better rewards for these prophecies. And honestly, the reward should fit the prophecy, right? In some way, thematically. So yeah, I mean, this is a cool idea, but I wouldn't use it as is. And I would probably do at most one of these per character in a campaign. But yeah, and that's kind of my thing with this is, I mean, most of this stuff I probably wouldn't use just out of the box as it is, but it's really cool ideas, and it's a starting point, and it's a lot easier to build on something that's already started than to start from scratch with nothing. So, this is awesome. So yeah, so that's the Chronicle, the Heroic Chronicle in a nutshell. So basically, just to kind of summarize, basically what we're doing is we're deciding where exactly in the world is my character from, what region, and then within that region, what specific settlement, and then cross-referencing that with the character's background that you choose to determine how many allies and rivals you get. You're also thinking about the size of your family and getting anywhere from 1 to 3 rivals or allies from within your family. And then, we have a way to determine specifically what the relationships are you have with these rivals and allies, and what exactly the rival or ally is as far as their stat block. Are they a berserker or a guard or a gladiator or what? And then we have these fateful moments, which come with some of the better rivals or allies, and are like kind of a turning point, like something mysterious or cool that happened in your character's past, which those are really cool. And that's something else that ideally you would tie more into that rival or ally, right? Instead of just picking some random thing from a chart. And then we've got favorite foods, and then this idea of the prophecy. So, yeah, even if you don't use any of this, I think this is a great example of how you can pull your setting into character creation and into your player character backstories more. And I love giving some perks. Like I love that some of the, these fateful moments. I love that you could have one, and not everybody's going to get these because you have to roll pretty high on the table for what stat block your ally or rival has. It has to be, you're not going to get it with a commoner or a merchant, or it's one of the cooler allies or rivals. You'll get one of these fateful moments. But if you give one of these fateful moments, a lot of them, you end up getting some kind of magic item or a feat or a skill or two proficiency. And I think that's really cool. And I also think it's cool that could come from an ally or a rival. So maybe you get this badass rival that's like a red dragon or whatever, which might be seen as kind of negative. But then from that, you got this fateful moment, which again, ideally, you would tie into that red dragon somehow. That moment would involve the red dragon. That maybe they got a magic item. Like right now, just off the top of my head, let's say I had a character who had the red dragon rival, and then their fateful moment, I decide I'm going to give them a magic item, and maybe their fateful moment was they encountered this dragon, and maybe they snuck into its horde or something, and they stole something from this dragon's horde. So that's where this magic item came from that they start out with, and that's also why this dragon is out to get them now, because they stole from his horde. So, that's a really kind of a neat little package where everything kind of ties in together. And now, the character gets to start with a cool magic item, and there's a story behind how they got the magic item. And in the future, in the campaign, there's going to be consequences when this red dragon comes calling because they stole this magic item from them. So yeah, this is all great stuff. So I guess my challenge to you is, think about how you could use something like this in your game, whether you run in your own setting or a published setting. And, you don't necessarily need to go out and buy this $50 book. I definitely wouldn't buy it just for that. If you want to otherwise, then go for it. But, you can just take these ideas. You don't need the tables necessarily, and come up with your own thing for your world, something that's really going to make these characters that the players are creating feel like they're part of this world. And I love giving them some perks for that, whether they get a feat or a skill proficiency or a tool proficiency or two, or maybe they learn an additional language, or they get maybe, some magic. I mean, the magic items they get aren't like legendary or very rare or anything like that. I think they're like uncommon magic items. They're not like super powerful, but still better than what most first level characters start out with. And I like giving a reward for that because it's, it takes a little extra effort on the player's part, because ideally all of this is kind of a team effort with the player and the DM, where you're kind of, with them when they're choosing these things, so you can discuss it, and because all these things need to be fleshed out and figure out exactly what this means for your character. And you can be there as a DM to answer questions about the setting and give suggestions, and also be thinking about how you're going to tie this in later. I know something that happens a lot is, players come up with these backstories for their characters, and a lot of times they do it completely on their own with no input from the DM or no, they just give the DM like the backstory, here, it's done. It's not like a collaborative thing a lot of times. And a lot of times it's just words on a page, and it doesn't necessarily get used much or ever in the campaign. Now, as a DM, I try to use that stuff. For my current campaign, I still have the stuff that all the players gave me in the very beginning. And occasionally when I'm deciding what I'm going to do next, I'll go refer to that and see if there's something in there I can pull in. But even still, I have to remember to do that. And, what I pick out of that backstory might have been just some trivial throwaway thing the player came up with. It may not be something they're really excited about. And there might be something that they're really excited about that I pass over. So I think this is a great way to approach this because you can do it together. It's more a collaboration between the DM and the player and come up with some cool ideas that you can both be excited about. It's going to have some impact on the character from the very beginning. And then you as a DM have a much better feeling of what these things are that could come in later into the campaign and what they mean to the player, what they mean to the character, what the player's level of engagement with it is. Is this something they're super excited about and they'll be really happy when it happens? Or is it just something they just came up with because you asked them to and they don't really care? You'll get a better sense of that than you would from a player just handing you a backstory that they wrote out. I feel like. So yeah, I'm really excited to work with this. Like I said, I brought in status and lifestyle expenses and figured out, okay, if you have this background, what social class is your character? What does that mean as far as where you live, what kind of possessions you have, what kind of money you have, as well as what your living expenses are and all that kind of stuff. Because that's really something that should be a hugely important thing in these people's lives. And it's something that just in the basic game, in the core books, is just kind of glossed over to a large degree. And even in the settings, especially Forgotten Realms, how often do you really see it even mentioned what class someone is? Much rather have it have any impact on anything that's happening, where in reality, it would affect everything that happens every day. So yeah, that's kind of my spin I added to it. And, I also have my own background that I've come up with and so I think, it'll be nice also for you DMs. It'll help you flesh out some things about your setting, maybe, even if it's a setting that's not yours or that you didn't create, even if you're using the Forgotten Realms or whatever you're using, this will help you kind of flesh that out more and have a better feeling of what that place is like and what the people there are like. So I think it's all good. And I think it can lead to some fun just going through this with the players during character creation. And I think it can lead to some really cool moments down the road as this stuff pays off throughout the course of your campaign. So what do you think? What do you think about this Heroic Chronicle, about these ideas? I'd love to hear from you, your opinions on it. And also if you've actually used this or something like this, I'd love to hear how that went for you. Shoot me an email at dungeonmastersjourney@gmail.com. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for episode 275 of Dungeon Master's Journey. Thank you so much for joining me today and enjoying some D&D goodness with me. If you'd like to get a hold of me, you can email me at dungeonmastersjourney@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at LexStarWalker, and you can call my voicemail 951-GMJ-LEX1. That's 951-465-5391. You can also join our community on MeWe and Discord. You can find links for that in the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com/Dungeon Master's Journey. We have a great community on MeWe and Discord, and lots of listener DMs are members there. So if you have questions or something you want to share, that's the place to do it. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy the show and you'd like to help support what I'm doing, you can find all the ways to do so at starwalkerstudios.com/support. One great way to support the show is to become a patron. Thank you to all my patrons. I really appreciate it, especially those of you who stuck with me over the break. Really, really appreciate it. And another great way to support what I'm doing is to check out my self-published D&D supplements. The latest of which is Adventures of Primordia, which is a bunch of player character options that I've come up with for my game. Things like cleric domains, new spells, new magic items, new equipment, that kind of stuff. All kinds of good stuff in there. So you can find all that at starwalkerstudios.com. So I hope that you have a chance to play some D&D this week. I hope you have a chance to run some D&D this week. I'll be back soon with another episode of Dungeon Master's Journey. Until then, roll for initiative.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music, courtesy of Cloudwalker, Transboy, Renfield, Stanko, and Ish. See the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/GameMastersJourney.